The Hinterkaifeck Farm was constructed in 1863 and was located in Bavaria in Germany. It soon became the home for a family of 6, husband and wife Andreas and Kazilia, their widowed daughter Victoria with Victoria's 2 children 7-year-old Kazilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Their maid had quit 6 months earlier when she was claiming the house was haunted when she continuously heard footsteps and voices coming from their attic, but the family just dismissed this maid as crazy. 6 months after she had quit, the family began hearing footsteps in their attic, and the husband Andreas found a random newspaper in their house which he had never seen before, and soon, a set of their house keys had gone missing. Also, the family noticed that their shed, which contained their tools and a pickaxe, looked as if someone had tried picking the lock to it, and Andreas found a set of footprints in the snow walking out of the woods to their house, but no footprints walking back out, meaning whoever had walked into their house from the woods had not walked out. On the 31st of July 1922, they had hired their new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived that day to start her new job at their house. Sometime that same day, Andreas and Kazilia, Victoria and her 2 children were murdered along with their new maid, Maria, who had just started that day. 2-year-old Joseph was found murdered inside his crib, and Maria had been murdered in her bed. Everyone else had been murdered in the barn, then their bodies were stacked on top of each other. For 3 days after the murders, the killers stayed in the house because after their murders, their cattle were still being fed and it was found that was being eaten in the kitchen, and also, neighbors reported seeing smoke coming from the chimney after the family had died. Investigators said it might be a crime of passion as high amounts of the family's money had been left behind. One suspect, among many others, was their neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had believed that Victoria's 2-year-old son, Joseph, was his own son, but it later came out that 2-year-old Joseph's father was his grandfather, Andreas, Victoria's own father. A few days before their bodies were found, local artisan Michael Plockel was walking past their farm when he saw that their oven was on. Someone then began walking towards him holding a lantern, making him unable to see anything. Michael then quickly walked away. On the 1st of April around 3 a.m., local butcher, Simon Reef Blainer, was walking home when he saw 2 strange people stood at the edge of the woods, who then turned their faces the other way so that Simon couldn't see them. The house was demolished a year after the murders and replaced with a monument in the victims' memories, and after being demolished, a penknife was located inside hay in the barn and a pickaxe had been hidden in their attic. The case is still unsolved. A group of 9 skiers, led by Igor Dyatlov, began their trek on the 2nd of February 1959. They were camping next to Otorten Mountain in Russia. They were never seen alive again. 2 of their naked bodies were found a mile away from their campsite 24 days later, close to trees. A further 3 bodies were then discovered in between their campsite and the trees. Once all 5 bodies were looked at by doctors, it showed one of them had a fractured skull, and all 5 had died from hypothermia. The remaining 4 remained missing until 2 months later, when their bodies were finally discovered. The final 4 bodies were wearing the clothes of the first 2 bodies that had been discovered 2 months earlier. Of these 4 bodies, 1 had a fractured skull, 1 had crushed ribs, and one of the women had crushed ribs and her tongue was missing. When the clothes they were wearing were tested, they were found to be radioactive, along with their campsite which had traces of radiation all around it. Experts examining all 9 bodies concluded that all of their injuries had to have been caused by something stronger than what a human could ever cause. At their campsite, their tent was found to have been cut open from the inside, showing no outsider had entered their tent. People had made reports in February and March of that same year to say they had witnessed bright spheres in the sky of that area. Authorities concluded their deaths had been caused by an unknown force, and the investigations into their deaths were ordered to be closed by Soviet officials. On the 29th of November 1970, one family were hiking in Isdal Valley near Bergen, Norway when they came upon a woman's body between two large rocks. They then informed police. Once police got to the scene, they could smell burning flesh and noticed that the woman's arms were stuck in a boxing position and the front of her body had been severely burnt, her face burnt beyond recognition although the back of her back was not burnt. At the scene, they found jewelry, a broken umbrella, bottles, a watch and pieces of a nylon stocking and rubber boots. The jewelry and the watch had been found beside her body. There was also petrol found next to her body. Investigators estimated her to be between 25 and 30 years old. All of the labels on her clothing had been cut off and the labels on the bottles had been rubbed off. Investigators had no idea who this woman was, and after she was sent off for an autopsy, it showed that she had 50 to 70 sleeping pills in her that had not been fully absorbed by her bloodstream, and they could tell she had been alive when she was set on fire due to smoke being found in her lungs. She had carbon monoxide in her system and a bruise on the right side of her neck. They concluded her death to be suicide based on the sleeping pills found in her body. 3 days later, 2 suitcases were found inside a train station in Bergen. Inside were prescription glasses which had a fingerprint on them, which was the same fingerprint as the woman found. Also inside were wigs, clothes, a comb, a hairbrush, makeup and German and Norway money and coins from Belgium, Switzerland and England and a tube of eczema cream with the prescription label rubbed out. There was also a notebook inside with a written code in it, which police didn't understand at first. Also, there was a plastic bag that had come from a shoe store located 130 miles away in Stavanger, Norway. Investigators took the lead and traveled to the shoe store, where they spoke to the son of the owner who told them he had sold the rubber boots found by the woman's body to a woman 3 weeks earlier. He said the woman had a round face, dark brown eyes, long dark hair, medium height and had been nicely dressed. He also said she had a weird smell which, years later, he remembered was the smell of garlic. Police then got a lead that she had stayed at the St. Swathen Hotel in Stavanger, using the name Fenella Lorch. Investigators then contacted other hotels to see if they had a woman stay there with that name, but none of them did. They soon knew it had been a fake name, as the woman had been using various names around Norway and used multiple passports all with different names. She would usually tell people she came across that she was actually from Belgium and she was able to speak German and English, and when staying at hotels, she would continuously ask to change rooms. They were soon able to work out the code and the notebook matches places where she had stayed at. Investigators decided to have her teeth and tissue samples tested against current technology and they noted how her teeth were covered in fillings and gold crowns and they theorized she had got her dental treatments done in Southern or Central Asia. When the person doing the testing on her teeth had suddenly passed away, someone claimed they had accidentally thrown away the teeth due to their smell, but these teeth were later found inside a warehouse at another hospital along with the woman's heart, lungs, spleen and liver. Her teeth were then sent off for isotope testing, which can narrow down where a person grew up based on water they had been drinking, and they then believed she had grown up somewhere near the French and German borders. Her DNA also showed she could be of European or North American descent. 15th of April 1994. 2 surfers at Sunset Cliffs in San Diego, California, noticed a swarm of seagulls over one part of the area so decided to check it out. As they got nearer, they saw the body of a woman floating face down on the kelp bed. Her body was transported to the lifeguard headquarters where a medical examiner there said she was naked and only had on a brass bracelet and 2 rings. Her body was found to have massive tearing wounds that had missing tissue and her right leg was missing. When she was taken to an autopsy the next day, they said her right leg was missing from the thigh, her neck and ribs were broken and the woman's body had scrapes, bruising and contusions on her face, and sand was found inside her mouth, throat, lungs, and stomach, meaning she had been alive when she was injured. The pathologist said her death was caused by an attack from a great white shark, then had died from blood loss and drowning. Although this pathologist had never seen a body that had been attacked by a great white shark, and experts have disputed this. An expert in Pacific Coast white shark behavior and ecology was quoted saying, "When a white shark bites off part of a limb, the break is clean, almost like you put it on a table saw." What remained of Michelle's femur was anything but. It looked like what happens when you get a piece of bamboo and whittle it down to a point with a knife. The body was soon identified as belonging to Michelle von Emster. Another expert was sent to measurements of Michelle's wounds, and he said that the wounds could not have been caused by a great white shark, as if they had bitten her. Its tooth would have come off and been found inside her body, but there were none found in her. The only bite marks found on her body were by blue sharks which had fed on her dead body. Her purse was later found 2.5 miles away from where her body had been found. And noting the sand in her lungs, experts stated that could have only happened when she was at the bottom of the ocean and she took a deep gulping breath. One suspect came to light, a man named Edwin Decker, a bartender who had worked next to the coffee shop she used to work at. Edwin claimed Michelle had told him she enjoyed surfing naked, and then claimed he and Michelle had drank together the night before she had died, and that they had both kissed at his flat, but that she had left his flat at 5 a.m. After her death, Edwin wrote a poem about Michelle. It came out that Michelle had a stalker, and she had actually quit her job at the coffee shop and got a new job at a stationery and office supply store because of the stalker. All she had known about him was that he drove a motorbike. Her boss at the stationery store she worked at said that after Michelle's death, a man had come in holding a copy of her autopsy report asking for photocopies of it to be made, and that this mystery man also rode a motorbike. Natalie Wood had been a major Hollywood star, starring in films such as Miracle on 34th Street, Rebel Without a Cause, and West Side Story. When she was a young child, her mom had been told by a fortune teller that Natalie would one day drown, so since then her mom instilled a fear of water into Natalie. When Natalie was 10, she was on set filming the movie The Green Promise, and whilst on a bridge that had been rigged to collapse, Natalie had been accidentally thrown into the water, breaking her wrist. Apparently, she soon became so scared of water that she was scared of washing her hair and told people of her recurring nightmares where she was drowning. For her 18th birthday, Natalie went on a date with actor Robert Wagner, who was 26. They got on well and soon got married in 1957 but divorced a few years later. She went on to marry and divorce another man before she married Robert Wagner again in 1972. In 1981, she began filming the movie Brainstorm, with the actor Christopher Walken, both becoming close. Robert Wagner flew out to the location where they were filming to see if anything more was going on between Natalie and Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken was invited to spend the weekend on Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood's yacht, named the Splendor. The captain of the boat, Dennis Davern, later told investigators that Natalie was infatuated with Christopher Walken. The yacht left on Friday the 27th of November 1981 with Robert and Natalie, Christopher, and the captain Dennis Davern all on board. They all then spent the next 2 days drinking alcohol. That night, Robert and Natalie had an argument and Christopher Walken refused to help, saying, "Never get involved in an argument between a man and a wife." Natalie was then taken ashore in an inflatable dinghy that night by the captain, Dennis Davern, and they both ended up sleeping at the Pavilion Lodge Hotel in Avalon. He said at the hotel, he and Natalie had drunk alcohol before going to sleep in the same room. The next morning, Saturday, he and Natalie returned to the yacht. That afternoon, Natalie and Christopher went ashore and began drinking at Doug's Harbor Reef, and Robert Wagner joined them later, where they all drank 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne and liqueurs. Natalie got into a bad mood, so left the restaurant, stumbling away as she did. Dennis Davern claimed that Natalie and Christopher had been flirting at the restaurant. The whole group then got onto the dinghy and got to their yacht by 10 p.m., and as Natalie was boarding, she was heard shouting by the nearby harbor patrol. Around midnight, another boat nearby heard a woman shouting, "Help me, someone please help me," followed by a man sarcastically say, "Okay, honey, we'll get you." Robert Wagner told investigators that he and Christopher had both had a political argument which had begun at the restaurant and carried on to the yacht. He said Natalie had sat there bored, then left 30 minutes later, and him and Christopher carried on their discussion for another hour. When he eventually went to kiss Natalie goodnight, he saw she was missing. At 1:30 a.m., Robert and the captain put out a distress call to the Coast Guard about her being missing. Natalie Wood's body was found at 7:30 a.m., 6 hours later, floating a mile away from their yacht, and the dinghy was then found washed up on rocks with its ignition off, gears set to neutral and the oars still locked in place, meaning the dinghy had not even been started. Her autopsy took place and it showed she had drunk 7 to 8 glasses of wine and her blood alcohol level was .14 and her death was ruled an accident. The chief medical examiner said she may have fell into the water as she attempted to board the dinghy. There were fingernail scratches on the side of the dinghy showing she may have tried to climb onto it. Investigators found broken glass on the yacht, which the captain said was from when Robert Wagner had smashed a bottle of wine after he got jealous about Natalie and Christopher Walken, shouting, "Jesus, what are you trying to do? F my wife." Christopher Walken said Natalie had argued but had made amends, but the captain claimed he had heard them arguing, then heard the sound of someone untie the dinghy, then complete silence until 11:30 p.m. when he says that Robert just appeared and was sweating heavily and told him not to turn on the lights after Natalie went missing. Her case was reopened in 2011 and a year later, her death was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, and the chief medical examiner stated that bruising found on her body most likely happened before she went into the water.